Wow, thank you very much for having us. Really excited to be here. And please give the organizers a round of applause. This has been a really good turnout today. I'm so happy to see so many faces. This is my first trip to Taiwan, actually. This is my third day in the city, which is amazing when you think about it, because I've been in Asia for 5 years and I've traveled all over, but for some reason I've always been stopped from coming here, which is really a shame, because I'm really in love with the city and the people and the design community. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys, and I've already had some dinners and conversations with people so far. Again, thanks a lot for having me. Our audio isn't working right now, so I'm just waiting on that for a second. But I'm going to go ahead and get started. I want to talk a little bit about Frog Shanghai. Frog, if you guys don't know, I won't spend too much time talking about Frog. We started in 2007. 5 years ago, and very small studio, about 3 people, very much a startup. And slowly we acquired clients, not only in China, but all around the world, and as well as in Asia Pacific. This is what our second studio looks like. This held us up to about 17 to 20 people. We moved in here in April in 2007. After that, we moved to a much larger studio, about 1,700 square meters, and that's where we are today. It's quite interesting. It's more what I would call a proper Frog studio. We actually have our logo in the office, which is great. But we do things like coffee time at Frog, which is a really interesting and fun experience. So every day at 4 o'clock, the entire studio stops working and comes into the kitchen, and we have a shared coffee or snack experience together. And we sometimes will tell stories or have games and play ping pong or other things like that, play video games. So it's fun. We're now 55 people actually, this is outdated. 55 people with 15 passports in Shanghai. So because we're the hub for Asia Pacific, we do work all over. So we do work in Taiwan, Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, and obviously China, Hong Kong. And because of that, we've had to hire a very culturally diverse team. So we have people from all of these countries as well. There's people like myself from the United States and from Europe. As a designer, as a creative individual, that's really inspiring. And I would challenge you to look for that in your careers and in the teams that you encounter, because getting the different points of view culturally really is a great way to inspire yourself and to learn more about the world in which we live. And it makes the projects that we work on a lot more interesting. We do a lot of design research in Asian markets and in emerging markets. This is an example of some things we've done in Tokyo. We work, again, all over the region. This is a little bit of our work. For some of you that don't know, we're working across every industry. I imagine a lot of people in here today are working in the mobile industry, but this isn't really an industry anymore, it's a horizontal, right? So we work in mobile technologies across every single industry, from government and social enterprises to healthcare and finance to consumer services. It's working. This is a little bit of our work. I'll just talk over this for a bit, it's almost done. One of the reasons that I've been at Frog for 8 years now is people. I'm really inspired day in, day out by the people that we have. We hire people from every background and discipline you can imagine, and they work together collaboratively from day one on every project. So whether it be someone who's involved in engineering, hardware or software, whether it be interaction designers, motion designers, visual designers, industrial designers, design researchers, strategists, technologists, all of these people contribute to ideas and collaborate together. We don't force design on anyone at Frog. We enjoy collaboration and enjoy talking about constraints. And it's really important to think about that when you work in multidisciplinary environments. So you can not only, I think, work faster, but you can also produce better ideas and help make those ideas more real. So what I wanted to talk about today were some things that we're seeing in the work that we're doing at Frog, with the clients that we work with, not only in Shanghai, but even globally. I thought this quote was pretty inspirational. I like to find inspirational quotes. It's far better to adapt the technology to the user than to force the user to adapt to the technology, from Larry Marine. One of the things that I really respond to with this quote is the word adaptation, and also the word user. Now, the word user has some negative connotations to it, but when you think about it, it's not really about technology that we're working with. It doesn't really matter what the technology is, as long as we know how to use it and we're comfortable with the materiality of that technology. And as long as we know who we're designing for. That's the most important thing. And then you can discover how the technology can be valuable to them. So for me, it's all about adapting to people. And that's what we try to learn at Frog, is how can we adapt the services and experiences that we create better to people over time. How can these be more flexible? How can they learn better? How can they be more rewarding, more meaningful? So there's 5 things I'm going to touch on in terms of future of interaction design. I think these are broad kind of megatrends that we're seeing in the work, and there's a lot of overlap in each of these. The first one has to do with screens, both screens and touch technology. Everyone here probably has a touch screen phone, is that right? Raise your hand if you don't. That has really only come about in the past 5 to 10 years, right? And if you think about it, when you maybe first got a mobile phone before it was touch, 10 years ago, how old everyone is here, 15 years ago, 2 years ago, when I think about that, and I think about the ringing and the buzzing that would always happen with the phone and how uncomfortable that made me, having this thing always kind of in my face all the time. It was quite jarring, and we asked ourselves as designers, creators, people that interact with technology, we asked ourselves, is this okay? Is this enough? Are we really going to be able to put up with this? You know, and now look at us, like today. Everyone's on these all the time, right? All the time, and you're just comfortable with it. So when you think about that transition, I think we're going to see that moving forward with a lot of different types of technology. People just become accustomed to it. And it's up to us to determine how far to push it, and to fail, and to experiment, and to try things that maybe are uncomfortable for people. The second thing that I want to show a little bit of sort of inspiration around are this, what I call adaptive fields. So it's that what we create, in its essence, is trying to be more human, more lifelike. And touch technology is a really rudimentary way of thinking about that, but what we're starting to see with different advancements in not only touch, but other types of inputs and sensors and things like this, is that the technology is starting to feel more human and more lifelike, and we're only just now starting to discover what that means in terms of trying to create principles for design. In addition to that, machines are learning all the time. Interesting thing about a machine that learns is that it actually doesn't need a designer, right? So we struggle with that question. To what extent can we create an experience that doesn't need us as designers, as engineers? There's such an immense amount of data, whether it be data that's in the world that's been documented, or whether it be personal data, the quantified self, for example. And making sense of this data over time is something that's a big challenge for us, and it's something that a lot of our clients are also struggling with. Fourth, meaningful connections. I think the trend here is really about the connections that objects, humans, and spaces have with each other, whether it be object to object, machine to machine, human to object, human to space. Right now, these two screens that are here, I don't really have a meaningful connection with them except through this little guy. It's kind of odd and artificial and not very lifelike, but that's starting to change because of technology. And so we're starting to see emergent behaviors. And as designers, we have to consider what those behaviors could be and try them out and see if they work or not. And finally, I think the fifth thing that's really important to consider is augmented reality and how interfaces are extending everywhere. And whether it be through a projector, whether it be through semi-translucent OLED or in MOVID, right? Whether it be through some other type of screen or projection or glow or texture or piece of hardware, the interface is really starting to become much more pervasive in everything that we see. And so you think about the problems that creates in terms of cognition and what we're willing to put up with and what's actually meaningful and how we might think about an ecosystem. Because the ecosystem of today can partially be controlled by a company, but the ecosystem of tomorrow has no ability to be controlled by a company, by any one organization or any one entity, because it's going to be too ubiquitous. So how do these things all talk to each other? How do they make sense without confusing us? Have you guys seen the Scrabble apps? This is really popular in the United States. It's a board game that, for the most part, died out and lost a lot of its popularity for a long time. And in the past, I would say, couple of years, it's taken a whole new form because of the iPhone and iPad. So you have screens such as these, where you have multiple interactions going on at once, and the multiple screens are actually dependent on the experience. More and more we're seeing this in the products and experiences that we create, is that you're not just designing it for one screen for one moment. You're actually trying to create collaborative screen interactions. And when you look at these screens, they're really just windows into some alternate universe or some new way of interacting with the world. You know, 1 minute it's a remote control, the next minute it's a Scrabble game, the next minute I'm watching Finding Nemo. Right? The fact that these contextual switches happen all the time and we're so used to them is creating an enormous payload for designers to think about contextual switches. This is why you're starting to see, I think, articles and speeches and presentations about application fatigue and overload when it comes to how many apps you can handle. And you're actually starting to see interfaces and experience that are getting rid of the applications and just mixing the functionality together in appropriate, more contextual ways. The fact that these can transform so quickly is actually a huge concern in terms of how we might design them better and how we might consider the payload mentally that people have when they're trying to make connections. Another example. Telepresence. So it's not just about interacting with software, it's about interacting with people. And the technology is doing a great job of just demonstrating these contextual shifts. So the real question here is, how do we manage all of these contexts? That's one of the questions that we're trying to solve. And the contextual shift happens so quickly, so frequently, and people are expecting it. What do we do about that? The next thing I want to show is these windows and how they can sense and react. They can mimic and come to life. You know, it's really beautiful to see this in abstract here, where it's not actually you, but pretty soon you're going to be walking down the street and it will look just like Minority Report, where the clothes that you're wearing shift and you're looking in a mirror. And so that is actually, it doesn't feel lifelike maybe because it's a demo at a trade show, but it has very, very lifelike qualities to it when something can mimic your behavior. And it's not important that it's a screen, because the screen will get higher and higher in terms of its resolution, its capability to display three-dimensional data, whether it's a flat screen or whether it's a projection. Have you heard of this company, Synset Tixel? Does anyone know what a tixel is? It's a touchable pixel. I love that word. No one likes to touch glass or plastic. We do it because it's there and it's the easiest thing to do right now. But what this company is trying to do is change that mode so that instead of touching the actual object, you get an electrostatic response that can mimic a surface before your finger hits the glass. Or just as your finger hits the glass. And so it feels like a feather or concrete. So what they're trying to do, again, is to become more human and more lifelike with this technology. So what does that mean when we have that materiality at our disposal as designers? When we can create that real feel. It's a different kind of example. This is a product we put out with Hire. It's on the market right now. It's a social TV, and it uses QQ and video cameras and high-speed internet to let people who are not sitting next to each other enjoy something like a basketball game. This is another form of telepresence. It's another form of trying to replicate a more lifelike experience. Has everyone seen this? It's not that new, but it's just beautiful. So again, when you have the ability to start to mimic life through software, you can see things like this happen. When that happens, you start to forget that you're talking to an animation, right? So what does that mean for us? These are the questions we're trying to solve. How can interactions we enable be so familiar, regardless of the technology, that people just forget about it? And they think more about what it is that they're doing, and not about the technology itself. This is a three-dimensional, very detailed map of Shanghai. It's an interactive map. It's geospatial information. I don't know if this exists in Taipei. This makes Google Maps look like, a playground. This is accurate. The color of this building and those windows is accurate. So the resolution of data that we have, whether it be mapping and geospatial information or whether it be media, movies, entertainment, is getting higher and higher, and it's always available via the cloud. Right? This is actually creating a fundamental shift in the way that software can learn, because it has all this data at any time. So whenever software needs to access this information, it's basically available for us. So when we talk about materiality, it's also about the density of data and the amount of data and how we can make sense of that. I mentioned the quantified self earlier. This is a beautiful example. It's starting to know how you move over time. And if you've looked at the fuel band and the services and the software that are being created around it, it's fairly simple now, but you can see how it's a platform for expansion. And they've already done something beautiful, which is they've opened it up to the developer community. So once you start using this, you can see your health or your fuel meter. But the real value is going to be when it starts to learn how you exercise. And then it starts to make recommendations for you. And they're already planning that release. So Nike is a lifestyle company, but they'll also become a healthcare company in that sense. This is a beautiful example of what I'm talking about as well. Nest is really simple. Everyone's probably seen it by now. It works independently after 1 week of using it. It learns. So the creators of Nest have realized that no one wants to change that thermostat every day for the rest of their life. You just don't want to. And it learns what you've done and when you've done it. And then it does it for you automatically, and you never have to touch it again. And then they've thought so far ahead that it builds that up over time. So January, February, March, April, May, June, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when that builds up over time, the next January comes around and it still sets it. And knows what to do. January 12th. 2013, after the apocalypse, it will still be setting the temperature. This is beautiful, but it's also representative of a new mode of thinking about software. And this is something we try to do at Frog as well, and we call it the 10-10-10 rule. And it's basically different time scales. So for example, one of the time scales would be 10 seconds, 10 minutes, 10 days. Or 10 minutes, 10 weeks, 10 months. It's a good, simple tool you can use to just think about what's going to happen to the application or service experience that you create across time, when you add time to it. When you think about data, you think about sensors, you think about how people's behaviors may shift. It becomes really interesting. This is a company called Proteus. The product is Proteus Biomedical. And they know how you feel. Because you can take this chip, it looks like a pill, but it's actually an organic chip. Stays in your body 2 weeks, and it can be programmed to go anywhere in your body almost. Float through your bloodstream. Powered by the warmth inside you, which is quite clever. Communicates with this patch that you wear through radio technology, lo-fi radio, which communicates with this, which communicates to the cloud. And what it does is, say you have diabetes, and you're taking medication for diabetes, and you're changing that medication. It can tell you whether that's working or not, and how well it's working. So it's not just tracking your heart rate, it's actually tracking how well medication is working for you. And giving you not only real-time information, but making recommendations of how you might change dosage. So you're in a very literal sense. I know it's kind of scary that it's doing this, right? But in a very literal sense, it's helping us hack our bodies. This is on the market. It's in trials right now. Another great example of all of these things coming together is the Google driverless car. This isn't the best video, but you'll see it going through this not so easy obstacle course with no hands on the wheel. So again, with the density of information, thinking ahead, this is something that we can create as interaction designers. Is a car that knows how to drive simply from a few commands that I give it. Like I want to go to the store. The question we're trying to answer here is how can we create experiences that learn without designers or engineers or strategists or anyone else involved? And a lot of times, because I work at Frog, we create things with our clients alongside, but then we step away and our clients take ownership and they take stewardship of those products and experiences over time. But this isn't even about that. This isn't about a designer stepping away from a client. This is about the company letting the product and experience grow directly with the customer. And it's a really important question to try to solve if you're creating something that you want to last and not something that you want people to throw away or get tired of. Next thing I want to talk about is spaces and connections between spaces, objects, and people. This company, 314 Innovations, has developed an on-off paint that can communicate with pretty much anything. So you can sit down on this couch, and if you touch this armrest, that light can turn on and off. So when you have the ability to embed that kind of technology in everything, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities for what we can create. But it also is a little scary, right? Because how much of that can we really take? How much can we handle? So what if I accidentally put my arm on armrest, right? And what if that sends my refrigerator to sleep mode and then all my milk goes bad? You know, there's all kinds of examples you can think of where it could be misused, or because many different types of organizations or companies are trying to create these experiences. Individuals are now also able to create them for themselves. It creates a really cluttered home that's very difficult to process. But sooner or later, it'll be just like that mobile phone that we had 2 years ago. It feels a little weird at first because it's vibrating all the time, but then I get really used to it, and I'm comfortable with all this complexity. It raises the question, how much is too much? You guys seen the Spotify box? You know what a TUI is? We call this a tagged UI. This is taking a behavior that has existed for a long time with music, and it's just updating. So these are little chips that have tags for albums or songs or playlists. And imagine I have some chips in my pocket, and Sharon has some chips in her pocket, and we go over to Kyle's house, and he's got a Spotify box. I can share those chips with him, and I can play some new music for him. I can give him a playlist. And so it's just an update on that type of interaction. It's very elegant, but you'll start to see this create new types of interactions because these things don't need us. They don't need us to pick them up. So that these Spotify boxes could talk to each other. And this is, in essence, a different but similar example with the glow cap. So this is a medicine bottle that you can shake full of medicine. And the cap can do all kinds of things, but it really serves as a reminder and refill system. It monitors not only when you take medicine, but how much you've taken. And if you forget to take your medicine, it sends you an SMS. It says, hey, you forgot to take me. So your medicine model is now talking to you. Right? I don't know how many things in my house I want talking to me. But there it is. I mean, it's for someone that may be forgetful, it's really important, right? Alzheimer's patients, for example. I don't know how many of these guys I want talking to me in my house. You can imagine, I mean, this is an abstract here. This is really working today. I mean, you've maybe seen this product. It does sort of lo-fi communication of SMS information or mail or things like this. I don't need 17 bunnies in my house talking to me, telling me what's on the internet. Or telling me I forgot to take my medicine. Now think about that with every single thing you have, right? It really creates complexity for us as designers to make sure we are considerate of what we create and the threshold, and giving users and people control over that threshold of information. It's almost a fundamental thing we have to consider. The point here is how do we make connections more meaningful between humans, objects, and spaces. This is a bionic contact lens currently in testing. It's in lab testing right now. It looks really, really scary, I know. Very futuristic. Looks like something out of a movie. It's solar powered. Just don't look directly into the sun. They're testing what kind of shapes, text, and other lines and information can be projected directly onto your eye at all times, or for certain moments in time, and you can navigate through that. And it also has lo-fi radio transmission, which can connect to a phone, which can connect to the cloud. So the information that you can get is much more rich. And also, again, you have to be much more careful with what that could mean. So we've got a colleague who was shopping for a house in the United States, and he was able to use Google Maps to purchase a house without ever visiting the city he was moving to because of the street view and the resolution of street view, combined with the help from his real estate agent. He was able to scout the neighborhood, look at the house, see if the neighbor next door was actually, took care of their lawn and had a pretty house or not. Now, combine that with what I just showed you, the bionic lens, and all of a sudden I blink and you've disappeared, and I'm sitting on an island. It can create so many amazing experiences, but it also can really confuse our brains. This technology isn't that far away. And again, it sounds really uncomfortable right now, but these are the things that we're going to have to think about, the challenges that we're going to have to solve from a design perspective. You can see some other examples. We've done a lot of work at Frog around this. Some of it's conceptual and public, such as this. So whether it be how you manage connections. It's not going to be long before I can hold up a mobile phone and I can see everything you've ever said. This is an example of that as well. Here's another one. What does that Big Mac really do to me? But if you experiment with this and you think about it, you can also do things like this. You can also think about creating more emotional, more engaging experiences, not just practical, everyday things like what Google Goggles does. Google Goggles is an amazing concept, amazing prototype. But is it as cool as this? Come on. This is stuff that can be possible through augmented reality. The question is how much, for whom, and how does that change the way we interact with each other? If I see something, you see something totally different. We all see something different. How do we get along? I love this, the weather. Scary video games. But it allows us to think about this in terms of an emotional context, not just a practical context. So the question here we're trying to answer is, what happens when this interface is everywhere? What do we do about that? So just to recap, these are the questions I've gone over today. They're all somewhat interrelated, I'm sure you can see. At Frog, when we work with our clients, they ask us some of these questions, or we discover them through the life of a project. And I think the thing to point out here is some of this stuff seems maybe a little obvious, some of it seems maybe a little funny, but we're just now starting to frame these questions in ways that we can understand as creators and designers and engineers and strategists, as people who create experiences. We're just now starting to discover this and articulate it in a way. And we spend months on these questions, on these challenges, just trying to make more sense of them in terms of what it means for human behavior, what it means for company strategy, how it means for societal implications and behavioral implications. Thank you very much.